Let me welcome everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm Teresa Spangler, CEO of Plazabridge Group, and we're talking about accelerating growth in a disrupted workplace. Let me share a little bit about our agenda and welcome you to the call. I appreciate everyone joining us today. So I will do some intros. I'm going to introduce our team here in just a minute or two. And I do want to introduce, first of all, my partner, Richard Spangler. If you want to say hi, Richard, who is my partner in crime here at Plazabridge Group. And we will talk a little bit about the backgrounds of our speakers, but I do want to share that Richard and I and our team at Plazabridge Group are thrilled to have, the Janai organization, Anthony Mills, with us today. We've got Johan and Ulf from Howwe, and Eli and Rob from IdeaBlock. These are strategic partners of Plazabridge Groups, and we've worked with these folks for some time. And so we collected these challenge statements, which I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to come back and introduce these great folks. We collected these challenge statements from you as you were coming in, and I want to share those. And then we're going to let our speakers talk to their topics, the trends in innovation. We're going to talk about patents, IPs, and trade secret trends. And then our main topic today is accelerating growth in a disrupted workplace. And Johan and Ulf from Howwe will talk to that topic, and they're very versed in it. Then we'll have some Q&A, and then we'll wrap up. So let me first introduce my partner, Richard Spangler. I think many of you know me, that Richard and I founded Plazabridge Group in 2009 and work as an innovation development commercialization firm. Richard and I both have been at this for a very long time, but I speak to Richard's expertise in doing new product development, new product innovation, accelerating companies, working with M&A projects, and working with clients like the Air Force and military, government, Fortune companies. Both of us have worked in Fortune. We both generally work in emerging technologies and bring those emerging technologies into both traditional manufacturing and companies of all types, and working through innovation. He's got a background with IBM, the former Compaq, which was now HP, and it has been an adjunct professor at multiple universities. Both Richard and I are taking on an adjunct professorship and developing a curriculum at Appalachian State in North Carolina, which is innovation management and consulting, which is a first for the university and universities actually in North Carolina. So we're thrilled about that. So let me go to the challenge statements. And the question was, what were your top concerns for 2022 as we go into the year? So as you can see, it's all over the board. I wanted to capture some of the more, the common ones that we were getting from everyone. But certainly COVID was only mentioned once, by the way. So I think that was interesting. COVID, I think we've somehow left COVID saying we know we have to deal with COVID. But these are our top concerns that we really need to be considering and working through this year. And alignment, you see over and over again, which will be a topic that we'll come back to. Execution, you see over and over again. Driving innovation out the door, which is we might be great at ideas, but how do we get it out the door? How do we accelerate? How do I gain foresight in the marketplace so I can anticipate things that are coming? There's certainly things like supply chain that are still a challenge. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are things that companies are grappling with and CEOs are really focused on. So there's so much going on that I bring it back to alignment and really thinking through how do we plan and organize our great organization and our team and our staff to be able to move through these challenges. People, upskilling, those things kept coming up over and over in your comments. And I don't think any of these are surprised. So I think it's just good to see them, that we're all sort of facing some similar things. So as we go forward, is there a question? So as we go forward, let me go ahead and talk about our speakers. Our first topic we'll talk to today. And if you are on the call, if you could please mute your microphone, I would appreciate it. So let me first introduce Anthony. Anthony Mills is the CEO of Janai, which is an innovation certification organization known globally, very well known globally. And Anthony has really made a name for himself and his organization by doing the excellent work he's done all over the world. He travels all over the world working with organizations in nearly every shape and size in both private and public sectors, helping them to transform themselves into forward-looking, innovative, and purposeful and human workplaces, and the kinds that use innovation and give meaning to the ongoing quest of leadership. In doing this, Anthony has helped countless organizations truly own and shape their futures. His areas of expertise include innovation-driven growth strategies, strategic futuring, emerging markets, technologies, organizational transformation, corporate innovation, ecosystem innovation, new opportunity identification, design thinking, innovation spaces, innovation teams, and I could go on and on and on. So welcome, Anthony, and thank you. You're going to kick off our topics here in just a minute, but I am going to go ahead and introduce Eli because the two of you will kick off, and then I'll come back to our main topic. So Eli joins us, and I'm thrilled to have Eli with us, another partner of ours, the Idea Block. Eli's a seasoned patent attorney. He's also a developer, which is a unique combination of skills for any person. So we're thrilled to have Eli with us and his partner, Rob DeMonico. So Eli, as a developer with decades of experience in the intellectual property world, before founding Idea Block, he practiced IP law at some of the country's leading law firms, helping clients, large and small, secure their intellectual assets. He has written, filed, and prosecuted more than 500 patent applications. Before practicing IP law, he studied electrical and computer engineering from MIT and UW-Madison, and began his professional career as a patent examiner for the US Patent and Trademark Office. In law school, he served as the editor-in-chief of the world's prominent IP law publications and clerked for federal judges at the trial law courts and appeals court levels. He lives in Raleigh with his 4 boys and wife, and I'm thrilled to have him talk about Idea Block and also trends in IP. And so I will let Anthony and Eli kind of kick off our day. And Anthony, if you want to take control, I'm going to stop sharing and let you share your screen.
Okay, thank you. I'm sharing a screen now. Can you confirm that you see that?
We do.
All right, very good. So again, my name is Anthony Mills, and I thank you, Teresa, for having me here today. What I want to talk about today is the state of corporate innovation in what's going on in the world with corporate innovation. So to start with, what we're seeing is there continues to be a growing awareness of need. So there's a constantly growing awareness of need for innovation and transformation. We've got over 25 years behind us now of this practice of organized innovation. And every year it seems like the need is growing and people understand. So, there's surveys that have gone out, and the surveys consistently show that executives understand and are aware of this need and it's for the sake of the long-term resilience of their organizations. And even Plazabridge Group put out a survey earlier this year and asked the same sorts of questions. And actually Global Innovation Institute is doing a survey right now with a different group, the same sort of things. But the awareness for the need is there. And people understand that it's really necessary for the long-term resilience of the organization. So that's there. What also is growing is there's growing clarity, I believe, around the purpose of these type of innovation programs, okay? And the purposes of a corporate innovation program are twofold largely. Number one, to ensure the organization is able to operate in an agile manner in response to the ongoing emerging needs of their market, many of which are often, unmet or unarticulated, so we can remain perpetually relevant to those markets. And then secondly, so we can develop the future foresight we need to see where emerging opportunities will lie, and then be able to define shaping strategies that let us own and shape our future. And then by doing that, to remain resilient to whatever the future can hold. So that's the purposes of the corporate innovation program. And there's growing clarity around that. People, executives are increasingly understanding, hey, these type of programs are absolutely necessary to achieve these types of purpose and really be around for the long run. I would say there's one thing that has changed about corporate innovation landscape in the last, say, 5 years or so is a lot of this. There's a lot of programs now that are really trying or striving toward accomplishing the same thing, but they're existing under multiple different manifestations. So exactly what the program or effort looks like and how it's organized will sometimes depend on the type of organization you have and what it does and delivers. For example, a very traditional manufacturing company may have a different type of program than a purely digital company, right? So these programs manifest themselves under a lot of different names. It could be an innovation program, it could be a digital transformation program, it could be an agile program, it could be a future fit or future strategic future type program. But all of them are organized programs with basically trying to accomplish and strive for the same things. That is our ongoing relevance, our agility, and our resilience to the long term. So that purpose we talked about, we're seeing programs that are manifesting under these different names, but ultimately we're trying to accomplish the same things. I really say all of these programs fall under the umbrella of corporate innovation. So that's going on. Now, what about the pandemic? What impact has the pandemic had over the last year and a half? And I'd say there's a conundrum that we have, in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. Its impact has created quite a conundrum that's accelerated certain aspects of corporate innovation, while at the same time retarding other aspects of it. So, for instance, it has significantly accelerated digital transformation, and specifically the transition to digital and virtual customer interfacing, right? By necessity, organizations have had to really pivot into that direction very rapidly. However, that's really only one aspect of the many different details of digital transformation. So it's far from a holistic and complete approach to digital transformation. It's just one manifestation of it. But that certainly has been accelerated, no doubt. At the same time, what the pandemic has retarded has been the professional development of staffs in all areas, including those of innovation and transformation, okay, as well as the bottom-up engagement of staffs in organic innovation programs. It seems that much of that work really benefits from the richness of face-to-face human interaction and collaboration, because after all, we are social creatures. So with people working remotely, obviously that sort of collaboration has had some suffering. We still do it virtually, but it's not always as rich. And so and then of course, in the professional development world, the training and development industry is largely shut down during the pandemic. There's just been not the same level of professional development and training work going on as there was before the pandemic. So in terms of people, getting development in the areas around innovation and transformation, that has slowed down some because of the pandemic. But we're going to turn the corner and eventually get there. Now, we still have a problem though, and this is the ongoing trend, that with or without the pandemic, we still face a problem. And the problem we're still facing is, in effect, there's a cognitive dissonance at work, okay, between what we often say we value and the actual corporate investments that we make. Most corporate innovation programs, of whatever manifestation, are largely still operated effectively like the Wild West, and in other words, in a rather amateur manner. And I'll elaborate on what I mean there by this ongoing dissonance. More often than not, what happens is a generalist executive gets promoted over this area of the business, someone who doesn't really have any real domain expertise in the field. And then they're told to go set up whatever, an innovation group, a transformation group, an agile group, set up this group and do this. So he or she goes off and sets up this group, and they say to the group, okay, congratulations, you're now the blank group, the innovation group, the transformation group, the agile group, whatever. Go read some books on innovation and transformation and figure it out, right? As though this was some sort of optional, nice to have, but not really necessary ancillary to the organization. In other words, it's not really a professional approach to it. And so, as you see in the gentleman in this picture, the people are left wondering. And believe me, I talk to organizations all the time, and I engage with their staffs, and they look just like this person, like wondering, are we doing the right thing? Are we not? We're not really sure. We've not received any real professional development around this area. We were just basically said, read some books on innovation and figure it out. And they're not sure even where to start. And when they start, are they doing the right things or not? So it really leaves people in their own personal conundrum about this. So unfortunately, that's obviously a wrong approach to innovation and transformation. Those aren't practices that can be approached in an amateurish way. They have to be practiced like any other professional discipline, whether that's design or engineering or project management or other technical discipline. They require professional development, skill, and expertise, not a generalist approach. So generalists really don't succeed here, which is one of the many reasons that so many of the corporate innovation programs fail. They actually lack the leadership and the skills needed to make them successful, which is unfortunate given how much organizations at times invest in the innovation effort. You don't want it to be innovation theater. You want it to have real business impact. So my call to action here is that really needs to change, and the sooner the better. We can't keep doing this in an amateurish way. Fortunately, there is a solution. And again, in terms of the trends around corporate innovation, more and more organizations are recognizing that, hey, we have to approach this in a very professional way. And so the solution really is a properly and professionally designed corporate innovation program married to the professional leadership of that program. So not a place for generalists. This is not the place for generalists. This is the place for people who have domain expertise in driving innovation and transformation. So a properly trained and experienced chief innovation officer or the equivalent is mandatory. It could be the chief strategy officer, it could be the chief transformation officer, whatever. But someone who has developed years of expertise in this domain has to really be put in place to lead these programs. And then you have to develop the staff of these programs in a professional way. So we have the solution. And what that means then is really giving in-depth professional training and development for the key innovation staff and formal certification of those staff to qualify them for the roles they need to fill, plus proper training for everyone else in the organization. And it's just like with project management. A lot of organizations now, if they want to hire a project manager, they look for someone who has a PMP certification from PMI. And that's just the cost of entry for getting that role. These people are professionals who are professionally certified. It's the same thing in the innovation roles. We want to make sure that people are professionally certified and have the skill and the knowledge they need to do the roles. So that's what we're talking about. And for executives, what this means is the education and the training and the insight they get, so they can really get the whole thing. They can understand it.
So
And then
I'll help you. Let me just get my socks on.
the light bulb goes on for them, so they can understand how the whole system works. And for your staff, that's so they can understand how the system works and they can engage in it and do their part to make it successful. So no more Wild West. I really ask everyone in the strongest of terms, stop the amateur approach and let's get serious about corporate innovation and let's be very professional about it. What that means then is professionally training and educating and certifying your people. And the important point here is, and really just to kind of wrap up my thoughts, is if you do this, you won't be sorry that you did. You'll thank yourself when your program actually succeeds and produces real business impact for the organization and its stakeholders. And they'll thank you too. Because the thing is, again, I work with organizations all over the world. I talk to them, and so many set up innovation programs and they're not satisfied with success. The people aren't sure, are they doing the right thing? Is this the right direction to go? Are we doing the right thing? And this is an ongoing trend that we're seeing. And, by getting the people really trained and certified, it gets, especially at the different levels in the organization, it gets everyone in line. And that makes an innovation program able to succeed and actually produce impact. And that's what it really matters. That's what really counts at the end of the day is, can your innovation program really succeed? Can it produce business impact? Otherwise, you're deceiving yourself, and organizations do this all the time, just with innovation theater and playing games. But if they really want business impact, they have to approach it that way. So that's my point to you today, and that's the trend we're seeing, is that organizations are understanding they have to move from approaching innovation transformation in a very amateur way, where everyone's sort of left to their own, to really being more professional about it. Okay. And so Global Innovation Institute, just to know about the Institute, it is the world's foremost professional certification and business accreditation and membership organization in the field of innovation. And the Institute does offer a comprehensive array of certifications and accreditations and resources and events and tools and standards and networking opportunities and more. And all of that is intended to advance the impact of your business and the individual careers of your staff. So you can learn more on the website. So that's basically, the idea, and that's the trend we're seeing is organizations. It is a slow, very slow and gradual transition from this amateur approach to innovation, because organizations again are continuing to see aware of the need and understanding the purpose, and executives are starting to see, yeah, we really need to pursue this and approach this in much more of a professional way. So that's kind of the trend and where things are going. And there are solutions out there to really empowering your innovation program and making it impactful. So with that, I will
Thank you, Anthony.
Open it up to any questions there are.
Yeah, I would ask if you do have questions, if we could hold them till the end. You're okay with that, Anthony?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
But to keep track of your questions, please put them in the chat, and that way we can come back to them. You can remember them, and we can come back to them and answer them methodically as well. So, but what a great segue, because we now go to Eli Sheets, who's going to talk about intellectual property and patents. And you have all these great innovations, but how are you protecting them? And how do you think about protecting those assets that you're creating? So Eli, I'm going to pass it off to you and let you talk a little bit about the trends that you're seeing, and talk a little bit about Idea Block and things that you're doing there at Idea Block that are really helping people protect their assets.
Of course. Well, thanks, Teresa, and thanks for allowing us to join. So it kind of dovetails well with what Tony was just talking about how important it is to set up a corporate innovation track inside of your company and really take a professional manner setting those up. Looking out at a lot of my clients over my last decade or so in IP, you see a lot of people struggling to do that and to figure out how exactly can we have a system that we start from day one, where we can come in and say, okay, we're going to institute this innovation culture inside of our company, and that's all well and good, bring it to market, but how do we protect these things as they go along the track of ideation to market, right? Now, traditionally, the protection aspects have been very much involved with patents, trademarks, copyrights, and of course trade secrets, which obviously are the four main aspects of IP that run through from whether you're in Europe, whether you're in China, whether you're in the United States. Those have been kind of the four main aspects of intellectual property. Now they're all a little bit different, and if you want to get technical with things, patents usually are the most enforceable kind of intellectual property throughout the world, and they're also unfortunately the most expensive, right? So a lot of times you'll have companies who, whether you're a startup and you're just starting out trying to bootstrap yourself, and you have this piece of intellectual property that you're trying to pursue. Well, maybe you don't have the money to go get a patent. In the United States, it's upwards of $70,000 to get a single patent just in the United States through its lifetime. So, a lot of companies don't have that budget for everything, let alone one patent, right? And you start to talk about, making it a global innovation protection in terms of a PCT is called. It's a worldwide patent protection. You're starting to talk about $125,000, $150,000 just for a single invention. And me looking at that, looking at the problem that a lot of the smaller clients had in terms of budget for their innovation protection, I thought, man, there's got to be a better way to do this. This is getting out of control. It's really leaning toward kind of the top heavy and the most deepest pockets having the only availability to intellectual property protection, right? So looking at technology and Teresa, as you mentioned, I'm a developer and have been looking at. I stay interested in technology as time goes on, even though I was working as a IP attorney. I saw the early kind of impact of blockchain, and especially with Bitcoin early on in about 2015, 2016. And I saw this as a tremendously powerful time stamper, right? And so what it does, in addition to being able to send money across the world, this new kind of technology also allows for a distributed timestamping technology, which can't be disproven. So what I saw there was if we could timestamp corporate innovation as it's happening inside of your groups, inside of your company that you're setting up these corporate innovation programs, if you could really timestamp everything and use these timestamps as proof of you had something first over third parties, you could have that advantage over them when it comes to protecting these things in the marketplace, right? So instead of using these expensive vehicles that are traditionally, associated with patents, copyrights, trademarks, these are things that you have to essentially get from the government, and you have to pay lawyers to get these things. What if we could do this on our own as a first touch protection for IP, using these blockchain networks to timestamp your innovation? It is very, very much more economical for you. And it also provides indestructible defensive protection for all of the things that you're doing inside of your corporation, inside of your innovation programs that Tony was just talking about, are very valuable to be setting up in terms of going now into the future with digital transformation and all of these other initiatives that are very much on point right now. So what essentially IdeaBlock does, and we've been producing IdeaBlock and developing IdeaBlock now to the point where we're getting ready to launch our full enterprise edition. We've gone through beta, we've gotten some funding, and now we've got the full platform ready to go functionally, and have a lot of clients on now that are really enjoying the experience. But what it does is it allows companies to put their intellectual property on a platform, track it from ideation all the way through product launch and beyond, or now we can get some kind of protection before we have to go call our lawyer, before we have to go pay our lawyer for this traditional patent. It allows us to track these things and have defensive protection over our competitors in a world where the cycle of ideation becomes quicker and quicker and quicker every day, right? Now, what are the trends right now that are kind of informing this technology trend on our side? Well, and throughout much of the world, the concept of what is protectable under a patent has really been shrinking. So in the United States, for example, software, for the longest time, software was something that you could get a patent on, right? In some form. Well, over the last 5 to 10 years, the concept of getting a patent on software or things like genetic treatments, a lot of pharma, these different things that deal with life sciences and software are now starting to fall outside of the idea of being able to go and patent these things and get solid protection in the form of a patent. So what have people been gravitating toward to protect those things? Well, a lot of times now it's gravitating toward keeping those as a trade secret. So instead of publicly disclosing these in a patent application, we're going to now keep these secret and use them inside of our products and try to hope that they're not reverse engineered by our competitors and keep this market advantage in that way. So we've been moving from the patent aspect over to keeping stuff for the trade secret. Well, the problem with trade secrets is you leave yourself vulnerable to reverse engineering, and also there's a concept of being first in that trade secret. So if some people, if you're keeping something as a trade secret and you have a third party here that goes and get a patent on that, well, if they sue you later on for essentially infringing their idea, you leave yourself vulnerable to having to pay patent damages for something that you actually were using in secret first, right? Unless you have proof that you were using it first, right? And that's the one, that's the aspect of that runs through our product, that we try to solve, is that you have undeniable proof of when you were using something. In that way, being able to take, a potential multi-million-dollar lawsuit off the table instantly, right? To defend yourself. And so looking at the main trend right now in terms of IP law, it's this movement from, the entire world used to be patentable, and now it's shrinking down into these smaller sectors that are more tangible, mechanical invention type things. And now at the edges, these inventions that are frankly a lot of our, a large percentage of the emerging economy that are now potentially not patentable. So how do we protect these huge investments in the largest sectors in our economy, which is tech right now? Well, a lot of it's going to trade secrets. So this circle of patents is shrinking, trade secrets is growing. And at IdeaBlock, we like to think we have one of the, if not the best tool to engage this new trend. So, also in kind of dovetailing again with what Tony was saying, in terms of IP protection, using technology to help protect your innovation, right? Setting up programs that are inside of a corporate environment that uses technology to your advantage, rather than relying on these meetings of a patent group every week, or simply emailing files to each other, which is dubious in nature in terms of a security standpoint, right from the get-go, right? So having a platform that is secure, right, that's encrypted, that you can trust to do all of this communication and innovation sharing inside of a platform, that is another aspect of what we're trying to solve at IdeaBlock. To have one place that you can go to manage all of your IP, to communicate about it, and to share it inside of your company, while being able to trust that this is staying inside of the circle of trust, so to speak, right? So that's what we're seeing now in IP, kind of what we're doing at IdeaBlock to solve some of those problems and to stay on top and in front of at the bleeding edge of digital transformation and idea protection. So.
Excellent, Eli. Thank you very much. And I'm sure there's questions, so feel free again to put those in the chat. I have some on top of my head, but I'm going to reserve them till we get to the end. But as we talk through innovation, and we're talking through asset protection, and we're talking about getting this innovation out the door and growth for 2022, alignment and execution keep coming back as core concerns. And so with that, I want to introduce Ulf Arnetz and Johan Grönstedt, and who are Howwe, and part of Howwe, founders of Howwe. And I'll let them talk a little bit about our main topic today. And Ulf, I'll introduce you first as the serial entrepreneur and founder of several companies, and you've grown them to multi-million-dollar enterprises in different countries and regions. However, now you're in New York, where Johan is in Sweden. You've done 4 strategic exits to NASDAQ listed companies in the US and sold your latest one to NASDAQ listed OpenText. Was it that OpenText, I think, in 2004? The board of direction assignments, you're chairman of the board of DICE and NASDAQ and nowadays US NASDAQ EA. Spring Life AB, a Cambridge technology company. Panopticon AB, and is it Ciceron Group, which is an advisory board group, and you've authored 3 books, Entrepreneur of the Year in Sweden in 1994, and one of the few Swedes to get a International Global Fast 500 prize in 2002, written over 20 published articles. You are the founder and chairman of Howwe, and we're thrilled to have you here to talk a little bit more about Howwe, and I'm gonna let you do that in a minute. But I did want to talk about Johan's background, who is your chief strategy officer. And there's no doubt the driven optimism in Johan just pours out of your pores. You care deeply about fueling aspirations of others and the cutting edge of insights to make them possible. With a vision to change the way that businesses think, feel, and execute strategy, you and your team work to unify the latest and greatest scientific evidence from fields of economy, psychology, and management with best practices and real leaders around the world. And the aim is to fundamentally transform user experience of strategy execution and to accelerate growth for individuals as much as organizations. So with that, I want to hand it off to Ulf and Johan to take our main topic today. You have control if you want to go ahead and share any slides. And again, please keep your questions in the chat and we'll come to all of those at the end of our session. Johan, or Ulf?
Ulf here. Yeah, thank you, Teresa. Really a great day to be here today. And the next part of this, we will talk about accelerated growth. And we have done this in Europe, and we are a company which is very successful within this area in Europe. So this seminar is similar to what we have done there. And just a little bit about the background. We started our company in 2012, and we found that many companies, all of them, are doing the strategy, they are doing the business plan, they are doing some sort of plan, and in more than 90% of the cases, the execution phase. So that's very much what we are going to talk about today, how to solve this. So Howwe, our application, is solving a business challenge that have actually not been solved before. It's a totally new type of business innovation, and it's a product that accelerates growth, empowering the whole organization to focus on the execution of the strategy and the business plan, so that happens in time. So it's very much about how to get the execution to happen in time. Many of our new customers also buys the product based on that they are already behind in a very important initiative, and they find out that they can't measure, they can't accelerate in order to get the execution to happen according to the plan. Our product lives outside the firewalls, which means that our customers needs no technical installation or something that could slow down the implementation. So far, tailor-based business applications within this area have been almost non-existent, leading to a massive waste in the industry. Normally, it's a product that is based on very low digitalization and products that are decades old, like Excel, for instance. And this leads to that the execution is stuck in the middle management level, and the employees have no clue about what they should focus on or what they should prioritize in order to achieve set goals. And the beauty with Howwe is that Howwe takes the strategy, which is normally both too complex and too high level, into role-based most important goals throughout the whole organization, connected to high impact key activities that really helps the whole company to understand the strategy and make it actionable in the whole company on all levels. So we have packaged, you could say, a proactive way of working into an easy to love digital product that supports the organization on all levels, from the CEO to the frontline employees. And it's actually when the employees starts to do more of the correct activities, what the company needed in order to get acceleration and get the strategy to really happen in reality. When they are doing more correct activities, that's when you get the acceleration, and that's when you get the execution. And then it's just hours, or it's maybe days until you have the provable financial improvements based on this. Our customers have a proven return of investment around 20 times the investment in our product. And that is already within the first 12 months. And we're talking about mid-sized and very large companies. Another result, which is common from our customers, is that the customers' employee satisfaction score is going up dramatically based on the use of our product. Howwe delivers an automated onboarding experience, feeding our new clients with best practice from more than thousands of clients and projects that have been done before and industries. It provides companies and also teams and employees with actionable insights for improved acceleration that is based on an AI engine. Howwe was released 2015 and is today a market leader in Europe so far, and that's why we're here today. We are about 3 to 5 years ahead of competition. And just to get an understanding of this is that Gartner, as late as 2018, wrote about the need of this type of product for the CEO. And they compare this market very much with how the CRM market was like 20 years ago, when the head of sales or the executive vice president of sales went from nothing or using Excel to starting to use CRM systems in order to accelerate the execution within sales. Before I introduce the next step, I just want to say that we have more than hundreds of references in Europe. We have many mid-sized and large companies. So far, we haven't seen any competition. But in order to go to the main part, today I have also my Chief Strategy Officer, Johan Grönstedt, with me. And he will be keynote the philosophy behind how to accelerate growth within a disruptive environment. As I said before, we have done this event several times in Europe before, and Johan is a highly appreciated speaker on this topic. So over to you, Johan.
Fantastic, thank you, Ulf, and a massive thank you to Teresa and Plazabridge Group for organizing. Wow, I truly love these types of events. Me and my team, basically what we do is try to collect like what are really the best practices of high performers and try to package that down into something actionable that we can teach other people and share that knowledge. So today the discussion will be, and let me try to share my screen. I hope I was successful here.
You can see it.
Fantastic, thanks Teresa. How to accelerate growth in a disrupted workplace and really executing strategy. And I thought, Teresa, you said it so well in the beginning, it's not really the next normal anymore, it's just the normal nowadays. We're so used to disruptions happening over and over again. So I think when we started talking about disruptions a couple of years ago from the Howwe perspective, really the core insight was they require constant but quite aligned adaptations. And back then, obviously, this was pre-COVID, so we used to talk about digital disruptions, you know, when Uber came and Airbnb came. And obviously, the last year and a half, everybody knows disruption in terms of COVID. But one insight that I might want to provide you with is that really when thinking about disruptions, I think it's a good way of thinking about them not as one-dimensional, as only being these kind of external events, new competitors, stuff like that, but actually thinking about them as they can be internal and they can be external. So a typical example of an internal disruption is that you lose focus on your core business as a result of a reorganization, for example, or as a result of a big system implementation, as a change of a ERP system. Obviously, the external disruptions, they feel more urgent because there you actually lose your core business, either through a competitor coming in or maybe you lose your ability to kind of execute as a sales department. We can't meet clients anymore, so we need to quickly align towards a new way of doing that type of business, realigning towards digital and as Anthony was talking about before. But really, I think this year has been so massively insightful, but we're also, and I know somebody in the audience, when they were talking about what type of subjects am I interested in, like we're kind of exhausted in this virtual world of constantly needing to change, constantly going through this, but also being remote as social creatures. Anthony, I thought you said it really well. We really are social creatures, and what does this constant disruption mean? Talking about, and taking a step back, talking about strategy and the way that we have traditionally been thinking about strategy, especially as CEOs and as senior management teams, I think one way that we've typically looked at it is that we have a starting point all the way to the left on this screen, and then we have, as CEOs, our role is to point out that gold flag and being that north guiding star once the organization is starting to execute the strategy, and try to keep them aligned on where are we going, and as we deviate, try to get them back aligned. What's becoming new in this environment is that along a path of execution, we enter into a phase of disruption. And the new thing is that when that happens, it happens quite suddenly. And hopefully you're at an organization where the reaction to this is not passiveness, but actually we try to proactively adjust here, or at least reactively adjust to, okay, what can we do instead? If we can't meet our clients physically, how can we then meet them? How can we engage with them? The problem from a strategic and an alignment perspective is that this isn't a coherent movement. It's everybody tries to do their best to realign quite quickly. So it turns out that there's two skills that are becoming more and more important as senior managers, as CEOs, C-suite level leaders. One is, how much time in terms of calendar time do you need to point out a new goal flag for the organization? So if our previous goal isn't attainable anymore, where do we need to go instead? And what happened over COVID a lot of times isn't necessarily that the goals changed, but the way that we reach the goals must urgently change, right? And that's the second point. So how do we ensure that we start executing aligned quickly enough as a machine, as an organization, towards this new path that we're on, and not trundling along as an oil tanker out on sea in our kind of previous behavior? So how can you accelerate the new behaviors that we need to be successful and thriving in this more disrupted environment? I think Teresa said it when introducing me. One of the benefits that I have as a chief strategy officer in my role is that I have the ability to read a lot, which gives me, that's one of my great joys, but it's also given me the ability to kind of read all of the management text that comes out from, Harvard Business Review, the McKinsey reports, all of that, and kind of look at, okay, what does it seem to, what's the state of our current ability to execute? And when it comes to making these kind of changes for mid to large customers or mid to large organizations, our average track record is actually as a oil tanker out on sea. So your average management team spends roughly 6 to 12 months deciding on a new direction, and then you spend a year or two trying to anchor this in your organization. So it's a 3-year movement. This used to be kind of fine when we weren't constantly disrupted by outside factors. This is not fine in a multi-disruption environment, if that makes sense, because it's not just about surviving one disruption. And I think you guys in the States, especially, you've been going through multiple, right? So it's not just surviving, but actually trying to thrive through multiple disruptions and using this ability to, I think agile was a word that I heard before, to agile, but also coherently be able to change direction quickly enough. That is an ability that's at the core of kind of outperforming your industry peers. And moving over now to, okay, the slowness and this inability to get there, what do we know on average on our ability to do this? And that's where we sadly, and you can look at the references at the bottom of this slide. I mean, it's Bain, it's McKinsey, it's Gartner, it's Economist, Harvard Business Review. I mean, it's industry consensus on that our ability to execute strategy is the primary problem around strategy. It's not the Kodak moment that we made the wrong bet. We missed digital. It's our ability to execute that's the problem. And obviously there's massive amounts of money to be won if we are successful here. So there's been a lot of studies from a lot of smart people done on this area. How would you go about improving performance? Depends obviously on who's looking at it, but it seems if you take a more meta approach to it, that there's 3 primary drivers behind why we fail to get it done. Looking into those, the first one is that our ambition to execute is way more than our ability to execute. So the struggle to narrow down to a few really clear prioritizations by focusing on less, you can achieve way more. That's the first primary problem that strategies tend to struggle with. It's more an ambition document than an actionable plan of action, if that makes sense. The second one is that when we look at strategy, a lot of times it's very output based. So we have strategy in terms of this is the revenue that we have the ambition to achieve during 2022. But actually, when you think about it, that's just a lag measure of stuff that we did probably during 2021 and even more previous to that. So when you can start measure your actuals, it's really too late to start impacting them. And when you think about steering a company, you want to steer it on what are you doing in order to be successful rather than just the historical output, because you have a time lag. So it doesn't really make sense. So having the ability to steer on the really crucial key behaviors, key activities that are driving our growth or driving our strategy forward, and clearly seeing progress around them, that's the second problem that you tend to have. And the final one is getting enough commitment, accountability, almost like cultural perspective around change, because change is hard, as we all know. So these three will be kind of the primary topics that we'll explore. Like, how would you actually go about, from an organizational perspective, enterprise perspective, implement a more efficient way of working around it? And obviously, this is also the philosophy that we built Howwe on. So using Howwe, you get supported by this. But I think it's relevant, even though you end up not using Howwe at all, the principles are relevant. So hopefully you'll find value no matter what. The first two, the reason why I bring out two in the first place is that they're kind of related to the plan, and the third one is more on the execution side of it. But you really design the success of your strategy in the planning phase a lot. There's this really famous strategy professor connected to Harvard. He's called Michael Porter. He's written, I don't know how many books, many of you probably read some of them. Back in the 90s, he did a fantastic, at least to my mind, definition of strategy, is that it's the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do, right? And how come that we almost 30 years later are still talking about a quote from some guy at Harvard back in the 90s? Well, it's because that's at the core of what we continually fail to do. So if we look into a typical strategy, and your usage, your mileage may vary here, but typically on an enterprise level, you drive between 5 and 10 top level initiatives in a strategy from the management team. The problem isn't necessarily there, but it's that it amplifies on each hierarchical level that you go down to. So if you think about a function, so your IT function, your sales function, those type of functions, what they do to support those 5 and 10 is suddenly 10 to 15 parallel initiatives that they have. And obviously this amplifies down. So on a typical team, frontline team level, you're in charge of 25, 50 parallel prioritizations. And just taking a step back and thinking about it as a private person, like if I had 50 stuff, like think about a priority, like one priority might be I want to be successful at my job, and a second one might be like being a father to my kids, and a third one I want to survive my marriage. And like if I have 50 of these things, like what's the success rate going to be here really? And for some reason it makes perfect sense as a private person, but as an organization we don't tend to recognize this. So a couple of insights on this slides that I think comes as a consequence here is that 80% of leaders' time are allocated to priorities that account for less than 20% of the company value. How come that is? Well, a lot of it has to do with that we either are not focusing on what matters, or that we're driving a lot of things that end up failing. So that's one. A second one is that only 11% of the initiatives that we allow to get started have the right time and resource allocated in order for them to be successful. The answer here isn't to give more total resources to innovation, because I think there's a finite amount that we can invest and take the risk on investing. The answer here is that we let too many get started, if that makes sense. So by allowing fewer to pop up, you can give them better prerequisites to actually succeed. And the final one is that it's not just it's too many goals, it's also that the introduction of the matrix organization a lot has introduced a lot of conflicting priorities. So I have one thing that coming from my traditional hierarchy, and then I have another thing coming from my matrix, or from my global organization, or from my local market organization. These are not aligned all of the time, so they can conflict. Moving over now into more the solution side of things. So since there's so much value in getting this right, there's been a lot. This is one from Bain & Company, but there's many like it, and I think it's interesting reading. There's been a lot of studies where, like Fortune 500 companies, they've asked the consultancy industry to come in and actually help us rank our potentials or our opportunities, and just, okay, what's high value and what's low value. So in these studies, what they find out, if you were to look at these little round bubbles as different initiatives, and you place them in a row from highest business value to lowest business value, where do we find the potential value in the strategy? And the result is like super skewed. You find roughly 70% of the total potential value in the top 2 or 3 initiatives. And if we say that there's 2 alternatives, and there's really not a third alternative here. One alternative is that we don't prioritize. We're unsuccessful with 80% of what we do, or at least not as successful that we need to be in order to really win on our market. Or we make sure that we prioritize down to what's absolutely most important. We really make sure that we focus on this, and we have a high likelihood of succeeding. That's just a smarter way. And that's the first philosophy and the first cornerstone that Howwe is built upon. So if we move back into a more practical perspective, this is exactly what you do to start off. You find that 1 or 2 or 3 and sometimes 4 really crucial business critical initiatives, and you unite around them as a management team and saying these are most important. So it's a top-down process, starting typically with the CEO and the management team, and then you ask everyone top-down to align and let everyone in a more bottom-up approach, team by team, actually prioritize what's most important. So this is a 2-step process per team. First, you look at out of everything that we have on our table, what are actually aligning versus these 2 most important goals at the top, or 3, or however many it might be. Isn't enough there. You also have to go in and actually prioritize within that subset of potential or opportunities, which ones are going to be the highest impactful things. And those become most important goals for that then group. And you do this exercise cascading top down in your organization. And this is a pretty simple way to make sure that it actually is connecting. You can't do this as like separate islands where you're just saying what's most important. You need this kind of alignment. And a secondary point to that is that everyone doesn't align directly towards the top. They align towards the team directly above them. And that makes a huge difference as well, because sometimes it's really difficult as a, back-end programmer at level 7 of an organization to align towards a top-line growth number that's on like the top management team. So this you figure out top down. Once you've done that, it's also like pretty traditional stuff in terms of making these most important goals. I think you all know about SMART goals, specific, measurable, stuff like that. So same here, like how much of these goals do we need to get done by when? So this ends up in a situation where instead of having, say that you are in an organization of 100 teams, 5 levels of organization, typically you would have, I would assume, somewhere around a couple of thousand, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 different goals and initiatives around an organization that size. In this case, it's not like you only have 2 goals for the whole organization. You have 2 goals or 3 goals per team. So you end up with 200, 250 goals maybe for an organization that are deemed really most important, and they really align top down. So a pretty effective way of getting traction and visibility and clarity, and actually way less stress when it comes to the prioritization process. And this is a pretty simple process that you could do yourself. And I'll come back to like some of the benefits of doing it more as Anthony, as you said, as in a more professional approach, if that makes sense. That was the first discipline, the discipline of focusing on less to achieve more and the most important goals. The next phase of this comes when, okay, we know our goals. We know we're going to Mars instead of the moon or whatever. Like we know where we're going now. But these goals, they're just ambitions if we don't have a concrete, actionable way to get there, right? So then you come in and start talking about activities instead. And it's pretty much the same story when it comes to activities. They're not really prioritized a lot of the time. So the first point is that we need to separate all of the kind of low impact activities that we do on a daily basis, you know, our whirlwind of reactive stuff that we don't necessarily feel is that value creating, but we kind of have to do because it's part of our core business, and the key activities that have a really direct effect. And I think over the years, we've collected so many best practices here, so we know quite well how you would go about to design a key activity in order for it to be really highly impactful. And tag along with me here on like a mental model of us, or at least our brain as still the caveman brain. I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, it still is. And our caveman brain, it's hardwired to be really pretty nifty and successful at reacting to stuff, like the saber-toothed tiger at the cave entrance, whatever it might be. But strategy isn't really a reactive. It's so much built around like our ability to proactively create our own opportunities. Strategy is like, it's 100% a proactive game. Otherwise it won't happen if we only are reactive. So when you're designing and thinking about key activities per team, it makes a lot of sense putting pressure on proactive behaviors, because that's where our caveman brain fails us in a modern work environment. A secondary thing, pretty similar, is that we love like urgent stuff. So chances are if you have a meeting after this meeting and your slides isn't really prepared yet, that takes 40% of your attention from this meeting, because it's just urgent. It doesn't necessarily, it's not even the most important meeting perhaps, but it's just that urgent, and that gets priority in our brain. So again, putting priority on what's important rather than urgent seems to have a great effect on the impact that you might have from designing these key activities and your likelihood of reaching your most important goals. Finally, like growth and an opportunity happens outside comfort zone. So putting pressure and designing key activities that are pretty challenging, and the ability to kind of execute these more difficult stuff almost always provides an edge towards competition. And the final thing is just don't make it too complex. Like a well executed simple plan outperforms an elegant but poorly understood one any day of the week. So these four things, we've done many talks on YouTube if you want to look at that as well when we explore these concepts more, if you want to have it as an input for team meetings and so forth. But these really are the things to look for when you're designing both most important goals and key activities. The ability to be relentless and steering the company on these key activities, it's how you actually start affecting the change that you need quickly enough, moving all the way back to where we started this talk, you know, where we diverged from being the oil tanker out on sea. So actually steering the company and thinking about that, steering the company on these key activities, that really makes a big difference in terms of performance, rather than just steering the company on, you know, actuals versus budget, or more the kind of lag measures around performance. So for these first two disciplines, I think one of the big takeaways that isn't necessarily apparent the first time when you listen to it is that speed in terms of calendar time matters a lot here. So I remember back in the early days of COVID, some of our clients, their goals weren't necessarily changed, but the speed in which you can realign key activities. Think of a sales department, can't meet our customers anymore. It truly matters if we're like, the next week we have new key activities designed for a new environment, or if that takes us 2 or 3 months. And our clients did it like in a week or two, like whole organization, multiple levels. And that speed is business value. And having a system in place where everyone shares the same nomenclature, everyone understands, we have a practice to get it going in reality, that matters a lot. And that moves us over to the kind of the last part of this, which is how do you actually achieve like commitment and accountability around these goals and these key activities. And again, a little bit of a mental model. I think everyone has at least once or twice or multiple times over a career, but come to kind of this level of key activity clarity. And again, in a personal example, I want to read more books. I come to that conclusion every New Year's. Like I know that this is good for me. I know it correlates with my life satisfaction and so forth. But a difficult point is setting aside the time and actually doing it. And that's this last discipline, actually doing it, going from a plan to something that we do as a culture. So what typically happens once you've kind of exited your January conference, you have your plan, maybe you've even set aside some time on a Wednesday afternoon and a Friday morning in this example to kind of be more proactive and be strategic, is this. This happens to me, this happens to you, like disruptions, interruptions, right? And our brain loves this kind of stuff. We get to react to stuff that feels urgent, right? That's why it works so well. And that's probably why most of us has pushed off the notifications on our telephone, because we know it's so incredibly powerful in terms of grabbing our attention. And that's exactly the difference between like the teams that are following the orange line. Your ability to see like all of these interruptions, those are dragging you down into your old behaviors, and you need to create such a clarity around the key activities, which is pretty often new activities that we don't know yet, or they're not formed as habits yet. And I think there's three things, looking at this specific point in time where you're kind of changing or pivoting. I think there's three things that teams struggle the most with here in terms of becoming relentless. One thing is, and I don't really know where this started, but most managers that we meet on a daily basis, they're so afraid of micromanagement that they never get into details. They're just broad picture managers. And when it comes to these types of changes, since they're new to us, most of us don't necessarily have the same vision on what we're trying to achieve. So the inability to really narrow down a few really crucial key activities with clear definitions, where when I define this activity, whatever it might be, you understand it the same way. So that inability to do that is one major contributor to why we fail to kind of change behaviors. The second is that we lack a common structure and a platform. So we have as many like governance structures as we have managers. Most of them, it's really like, as Ulf said, it's low tech, Excel, PowerPoint. And from the CEO perspective, that becomes almost impossible, because you need to, well, is this the latest template? Has everybody filled in? No, we have it in the CRM system. It's just very difficult to kind of understand, are we making progress towards this new strategy or not? Because it's so spread out and there's no one common system around what's most important. And the final thing is that we most often, even though it's the most important stuff, we measure it or follow it up structured most often per quarter in pretty individualized performance review settings. That's typically how you go about setting up this governance structure. Sometimes monthly. In practice, most companies live per half year as well around these types of initiatives. Ends up in a situation where January comes and goes, and in March you have your first follow-up structure. And I don't know if this resonates with you, but a lot of times that follow-up meeting ends up with like, whoa, we are not at all where we plan to be. We seem not even to agree on where we were supposed to be. And we end up discussing like what we should do rather than the progress that we've made. And that's really frustrating. And it's frustrating for everyone, like for you as the manager, but equally frustrating for the team member perspective. And so the first thing to really try to break is to understand that we can't do these types of changes on a quarterly or even monthly basis. It's too difficult. is built around too much proactivity that our brains doesn't really handle well. It's too important. So what our clients do is that they institute what we call a commitment meeting, which is a dead simple process. It's a team process, 15 minutes per week, normally tagged on some type of existing team meeting, where we only discuss these key activities. We take a commitment, which it's like a verbal promise to my managers, and even from a psychological perspective, even more importantly, to my peers, my team members, because we're all in the same boat. We share these goals and the key activities as a group. And then we have a system to follow it up, which is Howwe in this case. And you can have it, if you're only doing this on a team basis, I mean, you can do it on a Post-it note, but having a system in place makes a lot of sense if you're doing it on an enterprise scale, right? So start following this up. And this speaks to, and trying to close this out and give some time for Q&A afterwards. This speaks to the challenge with not having a system in place. So I don't know how it looks for you, but the most common way it looks is that you agree on something in the management team, and then from like the middle manager layer, maybe you have some type of business intelligence system. You might have some incentive structure and a balanced scorecard, something like that. You might have some consultants doing, you know, project management offices and stuff like that, and everybody like points in different directions. From the leader perspective, there becomes more department specific. So sales use CRM, finance use finance systems, IT uses Jira. Most don't use anything. Like the market here is like 92% of this market is Excel and PowerPoint. So if you're still there, you're still in the majority of the market. But as Ulf said, this is rapidly changing currently. So it's kind of in the early stages of explosive growth. But crucially, from an employee perspective, you have nothing. So you're really doing a couple of things that's not super nice towards your organization. One thing is that you're putting tremendous pressure on your team leaders, communicating your strategy, which is not probably that clear to begin with, and following up. And managers and team leaders on average, they're not that structured. So they need support around this, and team members need support in understanding the progress that we made and the value that that creates, which is one of those feedback cycles that everybody talks about, but nobody really achieves, right? So that's Howwe. And I won't pitch it to you super hard. Probably you understand the value, at least from a theoretical standpoint. I will happily follow up, but strategy must be actionable and visualized, not only on the C-suite level, but for all levels, kind of tie what I do on a daily basis to where the company is going and why it matters that I do it in one common platform, so that you as the CEO or you as the management team don't need 17 different platforms. And why, by the way, as Ulf said, strategy tends to get stuck on middle management because the visibility stops there on average. From a team perspective, creating this type of clarity around what's most important is hugely impactful, both for actually achieving that stuff and getting engagement on it, but also from a decreasing stress perspective. This is actually prioritized. And focus when it comes to the key activities to get it done. And finally, this having support around this commitment process really creates a winning culture there. And I like to think of it as the ability of your worst manager to become really quite good at management, at performance management, because it's just a process where you do this and you're becoming quite good at giving the positive feedback, the corrective feedback, and how we support you a lot in this. So that's how the kind of acceleration of growth really occurs, is that you start to accelerate really the key activities that are driving your most important goals within one team and ultimately as an organization as well. And it's how you install a proactive way of working for the whole company. Finally, and before maybe we leave it off and leave it back to you, Teresa, I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of start out small, and Ulf alluded to this initially, that really the best tip that we have is kind of find business critical initiatives that you probably already have or are just about to embark upon, that have really this high value, but is either not going quickly enough, or you have this kind of cross-functional dependencies where your typical department-specific tool won't be enough. And start there. And supporting this conversation, we'll happily do it with you. And one of the things that we really built out around along the years is massive amounts of experience from what truly works when it comes to most important goals and key activities. So we'll happily support that culture. And with that, Teresa, I'll leave it back to you for some short but hopefully pretty sweet Q&A.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. And I think that it's timely that you're talking to the particular issues that you bring up about strategy and execution for everyone. And there are a couple of questions that we want to go to. But for everyone, I mean, the value that Plazabridge Group saw in all of this, from working with Nye to going and working with Idea Block and then working with Howwe, that these elements come together, and the meetings that Richard and I have sat in over and over again, the top concern is always, I don't have visibility. And I think you brought it up as visualization. I can't see into my organization to see where things are potentially breaking down, and I can't catch them fast enough. And I think it was also very critical that the other departments can visualize where their teammates are and also see how progress that everyone's making. So I think it's just incredibly timely, especially since the last, I think, 4 or 5 meetings that I've sat in, this has come up over and over and over again. So very important. I do want to go to a few questions. I think, I'll go to the one, Anthony, that you were asking, Johan, if you want to ask that, and then I'll go to Richard's that was directed to Anthony about innovation. So Anthony, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so this question was directed toward Johan, and I really resonated with the presentation. Thank you. Is your observation that many of the executives have this tendency to fall back on whatever initiatives are just easiest to implement, and which means are typically lowest risk, versus really tackling those that are more strategic, but they involve a lot of effort to execute and probably carry more risk? And kind of a line of that, there's a whole matter of watching out for my career, at least in the short term. Do I want to take on a high risk, high return project that might fail and then I look like a failure? Or am I just going to play it safe and stick with, whatever's easiest and lowest risk? So, what's your perception around that, Johan?
Great question. First off, I do think it correlates quite highly towards like ownership structure and the role that you are put in charge of as the CEO. Are you in a change management mission, or are you more in a just sit off the time type of position? So that's one. The second thing is, over the years, I've come to kind of like, the way that I think it's best broken down is like, make the long-term bets, like go for the bigger stuff, but make sure that you steer it on a per year basis. So if you only do the bigger bets, one of the bigger problems with that is that there's an illusion of time available. So because it's always the hockey stick, right? Nothing this year. And that's a little bit of a trap, I feel. So you really want to create, and that's really a lot around the methodology. We want to create like virtual deadlines around stuff that feels way off in the future. Create urgency around them, because urgency tends to get priority in our brains. So even though if you make the bigger bets, make sure that you have an ability to judge the progress on a shorter increment. From my experience, I do think that, and final thoughts, my experience is that it's not necessarily the CEO who's making the risk averse bets, but the management team. So the CEO typically is one of the few ones who really wants the acceleration, to be honest. I don't know, Ulf, if you have a couple of words on that as well. I mean, your experience is massive here.
Yeah, I think we are only selling to CEOs in Europe because the companies are not as big as they are here in US, but it could be a profit and loss owner, a business unit owner, and so on. And what is working best is actually that the CEO is taking something that needs to be accelerated, an initiative or 2 initiatives, which is actually exactly what she or her is measured on. So it's normally a long-term goal, but it's also a financial goal already within 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. But they pick it, I would say that they normally pick it based on that they have an initiative that is so important based on where they need improved revenue or profit, or they need some sort of strategic improvement on the market. That's normally where they start.
Are you in your experience seeing that key management team recognizes the need for, I'll call it a platform, and I think Ulf, you said early on, similar to how Salesforce has evolved, and we've had many different kinds of project management frameworks. How do you see, and who do you see in the organization coming to terms to say, we need this, we need something that is much higher level, much more visibility across the organization? So what's your experience with that? What are you hearing, and who's asking?
Yeah, I would say that, for being frank, this is exactly, all the possibilities, as you could see within other business critical applications 20 years ago. CRM is one of them, where the head of sales, of course, wanted this type of application because the head of sales needed to increase sales and have a budget and was measured on that. But I'm not so sure that everyone within the sales department really wanted a CRM application. And it's a little bit the same today, actually, for being frank, that the CEO normally wants this application. It's already on the executive team level, one or two persons who absolutely don't want this. They want to continue to focus on their silos and their P&L instead of what's most important for the whole company. So that's why you need support from consultants, and you need support from the application, actually, in order to make it clear, not only for the CEO, but other people and roles in the organization, what's in it for me, and so on. So you create pull, and this is a very important thing. But for being frank, this is a new trend, but many people would like to use, low digitalized tools like Excel and so on, because you can't measure really with that, and you can't follow up. You can't do what Johan spoke about. Right. So that's the truth.
Excellent, thank you. And we have just a few minutes left here. Richard, I wanted to make sure you had a chance to ask Anthony your question. It's a very good question as well on innovation.
Thanks. So Anthony, one of the questions I have, and actually it's a topic that I'm getting deeper and deeper into, is this idea of innovation to satisfy a need. And which really is entrepreneurship. It's kind of the traditional approach. There's another aspect to innovation, which is tapping into dormant IP, right? I mean, there's so much R&D out there, public and private, that really needs to be leveraged into the marketplace, and the end result being an innovation. But it's a different animal, right? I mean, because you're not satisfying a need, you're trying to create a solution that and find that need somewhere within the marketplace. It's the old I've got a hammer, show me a nail. And it really is, to me, becoming much more important, because we have so much expenditure on R&D in this country that we really need to figure out a new methodology for commercializing it. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and what you're seeing in the marketplace.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thinking about the need, I mean, really, I think it helps to clarify, think about classify this in two groups. There's current needs, and there's emerging needs. And, when it comes to present needs, that we go out and we do what's called need finding, which is really another way of doing opportunity scouting. We're looking for unmet and unarticulated needs we can deliver new innovations toward. And that needs to always really be market pulled, not technology pushed, because you don't want to invent something that no one's going to buy. You always are aiming for adoption of whatever you deliver, and success commercializing it, and it's scaling up and getting traction and ramping up. So you want to find market needs that exist, and you want market pull, so you want to deliver solutions to that. Now, it's quite different when we think about emerging needs for the future, because there is no market pull for that yet. Okay. And that's where I think it gets a little bit more to what you're thinking about is how do we think about, the R&D we're needing to do, which is, again, as Johan mentioned, there's time lags and all these things. So most R&D has a time lag between when we initially conceive it and then we go off and develop it, and when it's actually available for commercialization, there's a time lag, right? So the answer there really is doing a lot of strategic foresight work and looking at where trends are going and thinking about the trends and the events and what the trajectories are and how there'll be cross impacts between them, and maybe even doing quantitative simulation of things. And then strategic futuring, where we actually think about what's our vision, in each domain we're looking at, what's our vision, what's our specific goals for each horizon, and then where do we want to go? And specifically, where do we see emerging needs evolving from? And in this case, we are going to have to do some new R&D and develop new solutions, whether it's technology, product, service, business model. We're going to conceive new innovations that we think will intersect with where those markets are, and in a way that lets us shape that market and so shape our future, right? So that's an important part, and then depending on the organization, there may be a lot of R&D going on. Some organizations do more R&D than they can actually commercialize. I mean, the prime example that comes to my mind is IBM. They're the world's most prolific patenter, with like 14,000 patents a year. Well, there's no way to commercialize all that and implement it, at least as a direct offering. So, in those types of organizations, they can certainly commercialize the intellectual property by actually selling patent rights and or licensing patent rights. So that's a different type and path of commercialization for the R&D, is to license the patent rights. But I think those type of organizations, and that's a lot of the big tech companies, IBM and Samsung and others in the technology field, are very prolific in the R&D like that. But most traditional organizations aren't quite as prolific. And I think the key for them is actually developing R&D and technology that they can actually implement and deploy commercially. And I think the key there is really doing the strategic foresight and futuring and thinking about how we want to shape the future and where the emerging needs are and how we can tap into emerging needs in the future, for which there's not the pull yet. We're going to have to create that pull, but it has to be done very strategically, looking at the future. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Anthony. Excellent. I have one final question, and I'll direct that to Eli. Eli, and then we'll wrap up. But Eli, is it ever too early to submit an idea and protect it as on the blockchain and using an idea block, for example?
No, it's never too early. It's in fact kind of one of the main impetuses for us to make Idea Block, is that having a system where you can in real time essentially place an idea, little nugget of IP on there privately that no one else can see, just to show for the future that you had it at this time. And then tomorrow, maybe I make an incremental adjustment or improvement, or as Tony just mentioned, maybe our strategic futuring is said that we're diverting now to this other type of target metric or market. Now we can change course, and it become this entire path of, we started here and we ended up here. Well, we can chart that all the way through and prove that to the outside world later on, when we do want to start to commercialize that aspect of the market, right? But having it inside of Idea Block makes that economical and affordable for companies, from the smallest companies all the way up to your IBMs, who, yeah, they're patenting thousands of things a year, but there are hundreds of thousands of ideas coming through that company. And then a patent committee filters those out and says, okay, these are the ones that are highest priority in the moment. Well, to be agile and to be able to move your feet and head on a swivel in terms of the market, you need to have some kind of fallback in case your projections are wrong, right? You're using somewhat of a crystal ball in this moment when you're doing these filtering, right, or these futuring exercises, when you're trying to figure out, okay, where is there a market need? Where do we fit inside of this future of our market? Things change, and to have every bit of innovation that you're essentially paying for at time X, have that protected now all the way times X plus Z, right, is important. So in terms of being able to do it all in a way that's not going to break the bank, that's what we're here for, to help you do that until you're able to get closer to that time of Z, that future, right? To say, okay, these are the things that we want to focus on in an actual bringing to market sense, where we can go out and patent these things later on. But for now, we want to keep our options open in terms of that patentability. And so we put everything in. The things that are left or typically left on the cutting room floor, right? Those things, we can all scoop all those things up and protect them in a defensive manner now and make the most intelligent decision later.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Excellent session. I appreciate my speakers, our speakers keeping to their time slots, because we're just a minute or two over. And so thank you for that. I will stop the recording here in just a moment, and we'll make sure we share the links and follow up. Our question to you is, how can we help you? We'll be sending out an ebook that has some summary of what we went over today. Richard and I will actually be sharing our Growth and Innovation webinar series, which this is concluding our year-long series of sessions with experts that we've had. And so we'll make sure you get links to some of the past ones that we've had, because they've been excellent as well. And then invitations to explore possibilities on talking about how we might be able to help your growth efforts this year as well, this coming year. So much appreciated everyone's time. And I see a couple of thanks notes in the chat. I'll stop my sharing and I will stop our recording, and just want to say thank you everyone again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.